So we've just been having a little check-in, with little being the operative word. Shifran and I were expecting less live participants on the Tuesday and the Thursday for obvious reasons. We actually discussed the possibility of doing it completely pre-recorded. So I'm going to do this more with slides rather than more interactive, and then we'll get more interactive again when we get to Saturday and more of you are here. And so here we go. Where were we last time? So last time we were looking at the fact that self-directed education is grounded in human rights. And human rights is actually built on top of core needs, fundamental needs. And that when we actually do education in a way that comes from meeting the core needs and acknowledging and giving a lived experience of all of the rights, we put that first, then sometimes it can be a scary thought that, okay, but now if you're going to focus on that, what happens to the education? So you're giving these people this wonderful human rights fulfilled experience, and they're terribly happy and they've got great well-being. And then what? Then how do they go to university? How do they earn a living? Do they live in their parents' basement the rest of their lives? Do they live under a bridge and be happy tramps? Well, I don't know what the word is these days, it's politically correct, but what happens, right? And I said I was also going to give you the basic recipe for what the schools do that have been doing that and doing it well, and having people come out with full human rights, including the fulfillment of the right to education. So first, of course, we need to look at a little bit of evidence that they do come out with education. And I'm just going to find a way to share my screen. Right. So let's take away that out of the way. All right. So here is a lovely quote from Daniel Greenberg, who founded the Sudbury Valley School back in 1968. And his school gave kids full equality with adults and full freedom and full autonomy over their learning in every single way. And he said after a couple of years, he was really relieved and happy. He said, they go out into the real world. They make it. They do well. They're well adjusted and they're not behind. With that settled, we can examine a bit more closely what's going on and why. So when we come to the recipe, we'll be looking at what's going on and why. But we want to first explore this statement that they go out into the real world, they make it, they do well, they're well adjusted, and they're not behind. Because that's the fear that actually drives a lot of people to not fulfill the rights, but to compromise on the rights, compromise on the core needs, out of the fear that they will get behind and not do well. And in fact, we were just chatting in the check-in about how often people set out to fulfill children's rights and meet all their core needs, and then they increasingly start compromising just because they, I suppose, on an unconscious level or whatever, they're frightened that if they don't do that, there's going to be consequences. So let's have a little look. Just in completely conventional terms here. We could look at this many, many ways, but let's look at this in the most mainstream way possible. Let's start by just having a look at how many kids who enter a particular system end up with the stated aim of mainstream schooling, which is their university degree. So we're going to park the question of whether that's what we're after and whether that's what we should be valuing. And let's just compare the apples with apples in terms of what the mainstream wants to see out of a schooling experience. So in South Africa, the official statistics from the ruling party, who are in charge of the education system and have been for 30 years or so, is that for every 100 children who enter the education system, 80 will graduate high school, 17 will get a university entrance, 12, I think that says, just behind my camera clip, 12 will get into university, because not all of those 17 will necessarily want to go or have funding to go or find a place or whatever. 6 will manage to pass something there, and 4 will come out with an actual degree. The main opposition party says that these statistics are cooked and skewed by the fact that the ANC doesn't count all of the school dropouts who fall away from the system. And that if you do that, then the real percentage is about half of all of that. So if you halve all of these figures roughly, you would see 37% coming out from graduating properly all the way at the end of 12 years of high school, well, 12 years of school. 8 of them being in theory able to go to a tertiary institution, 6 of them actually going, 3 of them getting some qualification, and 2 of them getting an actual degree, which means that for 98%, they didn't get the outcome that mainstream school claims it is giving them. In the USA, it was difficult to find the exact numbers, so you're very welcome to do the research for me. This is not my passion, exploring how things work in the mainstream, so I'm not going to spend very much time on it. It's just a quick look. So I've kind of got it all off Wikipedia sort of thing. For 100 going in, 85 graduate. Couldn't find how many get university entrance level of SATs or whatever. I think in the States it's a little more flexible. You've got all these other ways to get into university. It said that 61% go in to university, and 91% of them get a degree, which doesn't really work. But when I looked, it was difficult to compare accurately because these stats were for people leaving now, and these were stats in the overall population. So it's like possible that previously a lot more people got degrees, and then you're counting all those older generations in what proportion of the society has done that. Very significantly, I came across the statement that over 200 colleges place most of their first-year students in one or more remedial courses, which means that the schools haven't really prepared them for tertiary study very effectively. And of course, student loan debt is a very contentious subject in the US. It's a debt trap of note. Then we can compare that roughly to Sudbury Valley School, which is in the US. When they surveyed their students, they found that about 80% of them were going into tertiary education, which is higher than the national average. And yeah, apparently they did fine there. I don't have exact stats for how many came out with degrees. Again, in self-directed education, they might go into tertiary education for non-degree purposes more often because they are more interested in the learning itself and what they can gain, and they're less dependent on the piece of paper, which we'll go into more in a minute. And then Peter Gray studied unschoolers and found about 83% in his small sample, but he got that 44% came out with an actual degree, which is way higher than South African stats, but obviously lower than the general US stats if it's 91%. And a quote there that came from Peter Gray's study that also gives insight as to why it might not be higher. Unschooling helped me see that college wasn't necessary to have a successful, fulfilling life. And I'm finding this right now with our older Riverstone villagers. When we explore the possibility of them going to university, they really think about whether it makes sense and whether there's enough return on investment and whether it's what they want to do. You know, in my sort of normal, well, mainstream post-school reality when I was that age, it was just what you did. You just went to tertiary because that's what you do in order to be able to get further in your life. And then again, with that student debt question, that really becomes something that maybe does take another look, especially with career guidance people these days, more and more saying you shouldn't waste money on a tertiary education until you know exactly what you need, because you enter your field that you want to progress in. And when you hit a ceiling that you can't get beyond, that's when you know which qualification you need exactly and why. And that's the time to actually invest your money. Whereas if you're just randomly going in from school, you can often deplete your funds and put yourself in debt and not really get anywhere much in particular. I just want to go back there to make another comment. For example, I came out of 5 years of psychology study and sold shoes. And that's pretty common. So having a little look at Summerhill School, we mentioned Summerhill School, I think last time. So Summerhill School was established in the early 1920s in the UK. And the kids had complete freedom, didn't have to ever go to class if they didn't want to. Most didn't until their teens. They're still going today. And this is just this is not a piece of research. This is just a collection of a few Summerhill graduates who decided to get together and publicize themselves in order to sort of give Summerhill a little bit of marketing boost. But it gives us an interesting sort of overview. They said that most of the students chose not to write exams, but where they did write exams, they achieved it basically the same as the national average. So, you know, no particular advantage or disadvantage on an academic level from having done education the other way up. And then you can just see here, if you just have a little look at the different careers they're in. It's sort of just a really nice, interesting spread. So yeah, I'm just seeing here, Sylvie, you're saying at 2021, it looks like 37.9% of adults 25 and older have a bachelor's degree. Yeah, so those stats are definitely changing, and it is definitely dropping. I think it used to be much more of a routine thing than it is now. Then we've got the question of what happens to the people who do graduate. In South Africa, the Human Sciences Research Council says that, you know, we have a problem. We can't actually employ all our graduates, which we know it's a big problem in South Africa right now. And even in the US, there are a significant number of recent college graduates who were nevertheless unemployed in spite of having invested that and having that student debt to service. Wits is one of University of Witwatersrand, one of South Africa's most prestigious universities. Only 60% of respondents said that they were in professions directly related to their field of study. So this is also what we see. You go there, you pay the money, you get the degree, and you end up doing something else completely that you may not have qualified for. So this is also question around this whole pipeline that's supposed to happen of school, supposed to get you into university, supposed to get you the good job, and that's why we justify, you know, worrying about getting the school stuff the way that we do. So what is a good job? It's unclear how many people hate their jobs or just tolerate them. Unclear how many people really get to author their life. The Center for Disease Control in America, one statistic is that 13.2% of Americans over 18 took antidepressant medication in the past 30 days. 13.2%. So over time, one wonders what those numbers really come up to. So this is the question. You know, we've got all these memes out there and stories out there, like, you know, the man who goes on holiday, the rich businessman who goes on holiday, and he finds at the seaside a little fisherman sitting there with his fishing rod, casting it into the sea and pulling out a few fish into the basket. And he finds that this man is making his living like this. And he says, you know what, you should get yourself a boat and a net, because then you could catch many more fish. And the man's like, well, why should I do that? He says, well, because if you do that, you'd be able to make more money, and then you could buy yourself a motorized boat and employ people to do the fishing, and then you could catch even more fish and make even more money. So why should I do that? And it goes on like this all the way through until eventually you have enough money to retire. And then it's like, and what would I do then? And that's when the businessman realizes that, you know, he'd come on holiday himself in his retirement to come and have a fishing rod and catch fish. So there comes this question of, why wait for retirement to, do what you really, really want to do? How many people are in that trap? So there's no point going deeply into these studies because they'll be available to you online, but I'll just give you a very quick overview. So Peter Gray and Gina Riley sampled 75 unschooled adults. 83% had gone on to higher education, 44 had completed or were busy with their bachelor's. The important thing here, they reported little difficulty getting into colleges and universities of their choice. This is in spite of never having written exams their whole lives. Also, little trouble adapting to the academic requirements there, in spite of not having the usual admissions credentials. The longer that they'd been unschooled, the more likely they were to go to tertiary, which we'll see in another study in a minute as well. And with careers, most were gainfully employed and financially independent. There's no particular relationship between doing a rights-affirming form of education or a rights-compromising form of education. There's no particular relationship between which you do and whether you are employed. But a high proportion of the self-directed ones who've always lived their full rights were in creative arts, self-employed, STEM careers, and they mostly felt that their unschooling benefited them for higher education, promoting sense of personal responsibility, self-motivation, and desire to learn. In my main course on self-directed education, we go in detail into how motivation works and why compromising on core needs and rights actually creates motivational problems and kills lifelong learning, and what you can actually do to keep that lifelong learning drive alive. 7 participants mentioned having difficulties adapting to the formality of the courses. So that is one of the fears, but then the fear gets reversed because they quickly overcame these without impeding their progress. So it's just like this little blip they had to adjust. That's kind of it. 3 considered themselves to have been at a disadvantage compared to students who had been attending school. We'll come back to those 3 in a minute because there's something very specific about those 3 that actually takes them out of the sample rather than putting them into it. 77% saw a link between their current jobs and interests they developed while they were free to follow their own interests. 48% in the arts, 53% entrepreneurs, 29% in social or natural sciences, technology, engineering, or mathematics. So yeah, there's a lovely story in the Sudbury School literature about a math professor who didn't do any maths when he was at Sudbury Valley School, because he used to do his maths at home on his own and his own time, because that was easy for him. He could easily do it. It was his aptitude. He didn't really need to spend a whole lot of time on it. If he'd been in the mainstream, he would have been pushed to like do more maths. Whereas being at Sudbury Valley School, he could pursue his rounded human complete self. He could socialize, he could play music, he could enjoy fitness and things like this, and just have much more, sort of life balance and still have his career. So the participants noted that unschooling, noted positive repercussions for unschooling in their lives. Self-determination and self-motivation, 75% of them. Sense of responsibility. In my main course, we'll also go into why that develops. Continue the interest in learning. Confidence, easier transition to adult life. This is one of the fears also, is that children who aren't forced won't easily transition to adult life, but adult life is actually fairly human rights respecting. Absence of school stress-related factors, and more time spent with family, which is actually really important. We underestimate that these days. I'm just going to quickly pause the recording and grab a drink of water. Right. And I'm back. Thank you for your patience of all 20 seconds if you're watching the recording. Your patience here. Okay. So, in terms of drawbacks, because we must look at the downside, right? 37% couldn't identify any drawbacks. And the others mentioned receiving unschooling related critiques and judgments. That's people around them going, why are you in daycare? Why don't you go to real school? Certain isolation, if there weren't many unschooled kids in their area, bit of social isolation. All of this is because it's niche. And this is also one of the reasons why I run these courses, because we need more kids to be doing this. The more that we do that, the more it's just going to be advantageous, because there's not going to be these downsides. This is also a really good reason to bring your friends and neighbors and extended family on this course. The more you bring your community along, the better it's going to work for your family too, and all of you can create an alternative community together. Now, let's come back to the 3 who said that they had downsides from being unschooled. These last 3 said they had experienced parental negligence, forced isolation, or not being free to attend school if they wanted to. In other words, they were not in human rights affirming space. Their core needs were not being met, and they weren't in rights affirming educational spaces. They were being so-called unschooled. Parents may be labeled this as unschooling, but it wasn't. They attributed their situation either to a mother's mental disorders, a father's lack of involvement, or parents' fundamentalist Christian beliefs. So what you've got there is you've got parents actually denying the child their full rights in order to just maybe cope, or in order to try and, keep the children in that sort of echo chamber that you sometimes get when people are in a kind of indoctrination state of mind rather than an education state of mind. So those are not human rights affirming environments. And those are the only ones who felt they had major deficits. Surprise, surprise. Another small study from Hudson Valley Sudbury School, 85% were happy or very happy they'd gone to the school. And those who weren't happy had been there for just 2 years. Now that's very significant, because in our form of education, when we have kids coming across from the mainstream, we generally see that it takes them up to 3 years to de-school and adjust and recover their sense of self-direction. And before that, they can go through an adjustment period that isn't always the most comfortable. And if you're only there long enough to be in that period and then leave, then you're just still in that interim zone when you're in betwixt and between. You've left the old, you haven't really assimilated into the new, and you're lost. Try to warn people about this when they try to bring us teenagers. Some of them listen. And some teenagers transition across just fine. It kind of really depends on how much self-direction they've kept. The teenagers who are really strong on their hobbies and they're sick and tired of being forced to do stuff because they really want to get on with what they want to do are the ones who are going to find it easier to transition. The ones who are just struggling with school and just can't cope and they're basically broken. On the one hand, they need to escape even more and they need to heal even more, but then they can't be put under time pressure that they're supposed to now self-direct and achieve something like that, because they're going to need healing first. Contrast this with the mainstream. Yale did a study nationwide, 21,000. That's a nice big study. And they found that nearly 75% of students had negative feelings towards school, as opposed to all of these positive feelings when one's core needs are met. And they checked this throughout the school day, that it's not just their perception, it's a single point in time. They actually got them to log throughout the day. Not just when you're tired and you come home and you think you had a lousy day. 60% of the time they were feeling negative during the day. So in education that gives kids freedom and empowerment, fulfills their core needs, acknowledges their rights, most students don't choose to write exams because it's not useful to them. They choose to write exams when they want to write exams, when they have a good reason. But one of the things, again, that we'll go into in my main course is that meta skills development doesn't require standardized curricular content or assessments. Meta skills is something we'll talk about quite a lot. This is sort of really where the education happens rather than in the content. And the fact of the matter is that most self-directed education learning doesn't even look educational in the conventional sense. You don't have kids mostly sitting down to do worksheets because they're free to and they want to, and it's their own idea and they're going to do worksheets now. A lot of the learning is hard to track. So what is it that all these schools and homes are doing right in being able to make that difference between neglect and support? What's that recipe that I promised you? So I'm going to touch on it this time and then leave you to think on it a little bit, and then we'll go into it more on Saturday. And then if you decide to come and do my main course, then we'll really go into it and look at how it's done. But here's the basics. This is what makes the difference between neglect and supporting core needs and full human rights in an educational setting. What does it look like? This was actually extracted by Dr. Peter Gray. And he extracted this from looking at the Sudbury Valley graduates and the unschooling graduates, and also all of his work in evolutionary psychology, looking at where did this kind of learning come from, and finding this in hunter-gatherer cultures around the world from anthropology. That in all sorts of different places of the world, there were some things in common between those cultures and the way their kids learned and these schools and homes. And he concluded that there are fundamental drives in all of us, in humans, which again we'll unpack in more detail if you stay with me longer. Curiosity is one, obviously. We're not curious, and we don't engage, but we are all curious. I mean, look at a little baby. They're intensely curious, born that way, playful. The younger we are, the more we preserve it. We can get it back, and we can also prevent it from atrophying. I also just love that, you know, at Riverstone, some of our graduates, like 20 years old or 21 years old, now come back and play hide and seek, you know, with real enjoyment. They've never lost it. Sociability, which is what gets us to actually interact with each other and learn from each other, teach each other, because we consolidate our learning as we teach. Planfulness, yeah, we learn to plan, test our hypothesis, make a plan of action, see how it goes, learn from our mistakes. Autonomy, I think I added these two. Yeah, autonomy, that need to do it myself. It's also a very, very powerful drive you see from very, very young. And the drive for mastery, that need to actually excel at something and do it better and push yourself to the next level. So that's my addition, to bring those 4 drives up to 6. Then optimizing conditions. This is what you can provide, and you can make a plan to provide these, and you can use this as a checklist to see if you're providing them. And this is just the most beautiful gift, because there you go. Here's your recipe. So these optimizing conditions help these drives operate powerfully and effectively and sufficiently. So the first one is the social expectation and reality that education is the child's responsibility. Now, in some ways, this is the hardest for us to provide, usually, if we've been through a schooled reality. And this is where a lot of places and spaces and families that want to meet core needs and fulfill children's rights and provide self-directed education, can't manage it because it's too scary, right? Because it really works when we really make it their business and we really let go of making it happen for them. And it has to be real, because there's a sense in which if you're holding the safety net there, it's kind of like, humans naturally reach out and rely on that and then don't take full responsibility for it, because it's a simulation, it's a game, play, it's not really real. I am going to have to just take 1 second's break, and then I will be back with you. Go. All right, and sharing my screen again. Then the next one is unlimited time to play and explore and pursue one's own interests, because that unlimited time is what allows for a whole lot of things that, again, we explore in depth in my main course. Like, for example, Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow. You need to not be interrupted more than necessary. Number 3 is the opportunity to play with the tools of the culture. And play also involves not having high stakes, it being fine if that there are mistakes. Mistakes are funny instead of shameful. And the tools of the culture. Kids need to be allowed to work with the real thing, not just with the toys. They need to actually find out how things really work, which is also where at Sudbury schools we have kids are able to play with decision making in a very, very real way. Importantly, number 4 is access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. It's not that kids just get on with it without any interaction with adults at all. The facilitator's role in self-directed education is very important. We need to learn how to be available to assist in a very present way without interfering, without judging, and without denting people's confidence. Number 5 is also really important, and one of the most difficult ones to supply if you're unschooling at home, unless you have quite a big local community. Free age mixing among children and adolescents. In those hunter-gatherer cultures and in the Sudbury schools and in a rich unschooling community, you have a number of kids who make a kid group, and adults can kind of pull back out of it for some of the time so that those natural dynamics can develop and they can actually play with their identities and their roles and their empowerment, supporting each other and being supported. And with that, immersion in a stable, supportive, and respectful community. So those are the 6 that always get quoted, which seemed to me to be missing something. And I thought, well, I think it's these 2 things. And then when I went to look at Peter Gray's work in detail, I found that these are here in his work as well. I think that he maybe collapsed them into number 6. But I think it's important to expand them back out and look at them direct in the face, because they're really useful and they're necessary. Part of what makes a stable, supportive, respectful community is the ability to debate in a way that is supportive. It's not an echo chamber. There's a free exchange and debate of ideas. You can disagree with people. You can share your perspectives. You still belong. Nobody will cancel you. That's part of what's actually needed in order to be able to explore your thinking and really develop your opinions. And together with that, empowerment. You have to be able to really impact your learning reality. You need to be able to advocate for things that you need. You need to be able to resolve problems that you have. And you need to be able to shape and impact the learning environment. So these are the ingredients that you need. This is your recipe. And what I'd like to suggest is that you have a bit of a self-reflection if you would like to. It's an invitation to look at how the core needs, competence, autonomy, relatedness, dignity, safety relates to these optimizing conditions, because it's actually quite interesting once you start looking, that you can map them on quite nicely. Again, not in a one-to-one way, but a number of core needs get met by each of these optimizing conditions, and every single one of these optimizing conditions, like the human rights, is again intimately related to meeting those core needs. So that's sort of it for today. And of course, it's not just quite so easy to just like get the recipe and now you're fine, because it can be hard to get your thinking around this, because it's just so different to the way that we grew up going through school. I mean, I think Eileen, if you're watching this, you maybe to you it feels a little more natural, but to the rest of us, as far as I know, those optimizing conditions look so different to school and to mainstream home education. So how do we actually shift our mindsets? How do we change our habits and beliefs? And it's not completely simple and straightforward. It's not like changing your socks. But the more aha experiences you have, the more opportunity you have to see things happening, get examples, and live the experience, then many of the things we believed turn out to be urban myths or misunderstandings. So you see all this criticism online if you go looking, because I always go looking for the downsides. I'm always trying to puncture the theories. So I regularly go and look at, who's regretting having been unschooled, who hated going to their Sudbury school, because people complain a lot about everything. It's obvious that you're going to find these things. And I tend to find again and again, the complaints I turn up or the criticisms I turn up are not from people who've done it. They're from people who cannot believe that it can work because they have no experience of it. And they pass on these misunderstandings of what it is and these beliefs that it can't work by being vocal about it. And then other people read them. So that doesn't help us make informed decisions. So to get to a place to trust that something different is possible, we need to look at what is prejudice about, like, oh, that sounds too good to be true, or that sounds impossible, and what is fact. So this is where Stephan's going to give you a beautiful session on Thursday. And he's going to be telling you a real life story that is kind of like a parable for this, I suppose, to help us understand just how common it can be and how far it can go when a society starts believing something, and how hard it can be to change our minds once we've accepted that that's the way we all think. So, yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. And I just want to see here in the chat. Yes. So we don't tell children what to learn or when or how, no matter how much we think they need to learn it. Yeah. So that's a very tough one to get your head around, I think, because that can be really scary until we have all the ahas. Once we have all the ahas, then that makes perfect sense. And that's ultimately where we want to get to. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can have a little checkout. And I look forward to seeing people, hopefully. Yeah, I see your dog is making noise. It's fine. We'll have lots of time to chat live on Saturday. When more of us are together again, then we'll prioritize that again. So if you're watching the recording, I invite you again to have a look at the optimizing conditions and the core needs. I will send them to you in text in the email so that they're there. You can easily refer to them and just start noticing, how would this optimizing condition meet those core needs? So that's the invitation.